Greig, he's never been out of your picture in the last 10 minutes. Backstab.
John Greig became the man Rangers trusted most. Not because life was easy, not because football was kind, but because when the club faced its hardest moments, he never walked away. For decades, supporters looked to one captain, one leader, one name, John Greig. His legacy was never built only on trophies. It was built on loyalty, on responsibility, on carrying a weight few footballers have ever known. The strange part is that none of it was supposed to happen. As a young boy, he dreamed of a very different future. But football had other plans. Those plans would make him Rangers' greatest ever Ranger. But they would also leave him carrying memories that no football captain should ever have to bear. This is the extraordinary story of John Greig, the Hearts boy who carried Rangers' darkest day. Subscribe, because football's greatest legends deserve to be remembered for the sacrifices behind their greatness. John Greig was born in Edinburgh on 11 September 1942. Long before Rangers knew his name, he was just another football mad boy. But there was one club that meant everything to him: Hearts. He dreamed of playing at Tynecastle. He believed that was where his future belonged. Yet football can be cruel in unexpected ways. Hearts never came for him. They believed he was too small, too slight, not ready for their first team. Then, everything changed. A Rangers scout arrived at the Greig family home. John's first reaction was simple: "I'm not signing. I'm a Hearts supporter." But his father had already made the decision. He looked at his son and quietly said, "Sign that paper." John Greig listened. At that moment, he believed he was leaving behind the club he loved. He could never have imagined that one signature would begin one of the greatest careers in Rangers history, or that the Hearts boy would one day become the greatest ever Ranger. John Greig did not become a legend overnight. Nothing came easily. He earned his place, one performance at a time. Week after week, season after season, supporters quickly noticed something different about him. He never hid. He never looked for excuses. When Rangers were under pressure, John Greig wanted the responsibility. That attitude made him a natural leader. Soon, the captain's armband belonged to him. It was not because he shouted the loudest. It was because his teammates trusted him. His opponents respected him. And Rangers supporters believed he would always fight until the final whistle. Success followed. League titles, Scottish Cups, League Cups, then European glory. But football has a way of testing its strongest men. Before John Greig became the symbol of Rangers' greatest triumphs, he first experienced one of the most painful humiliations of his career. It was a defeat that supporters would never forget. In January 1967, Rangers travelled to face Berwick Rangers in the Scottish Cup. On paper, it should have been routine. One of Scotland's biggest clubs against part-time opponents. Instead, it became one of the greatest shocks Scottish football had ever seen. Berwick Rangers won, 1-0. The football world could hardly believe it. Neither could John Greig. Years later, he admitted it was probably the worst defeat of his Rangers career. As the minutes disappeared, he knew the goal would never come. The final whistle brought disbelief, embarrassment, silence. For many players, a defeat like that can define a career. For John Greig, it became something different, a painful lesson, one that made him stronger. Because football had not finished testing him. The hardest chapter of his life was still waiting, and it would change Rangers forever. On the 2nd January 1971, Rangers faced Celtic at Ibrox. It was another Old Firm match, another packed stadium, another afternoon that seemed no different from countless others. Then, everything changed. As supporters tried to leave the ground, a crush developed on Stairway 13. By the time the chaos ended, 66 Rangers supporters had lost their lives. Hundreds more were injured. Scottish football had never witnessed anything like it. John Greig was Rangers' captain. There were no words. That could make sense of what had happened. No victory, no speech, no trophy could ease the pain. The club was grieving, families were grieving, an entire city was grieving. Years later, John Greig would still return to remember those who never came home. His statue outside Ibrox became more than a tribute to a footballer. It became part of a place where memories are honoured, where names are never forgotten. That day changed Rangers forever, and it changed John Greig for the rest of his life. Yet somehow, only a little over a year later, he would lead Rangers to the greatest night in the club's European history. Only 16 months after Rangers' darkest day, John Greig walked onto one of football's biggest stages. The destination was Barcelona. The occasion, the European Cup Winners' Cup final. Waiting for Rangers was Dynamo Moscow. It was more than a football match. For Rangers supporters, it felt like a chance to smile again. When the final whistle arrived, Rangers had won. For the first time, a major European trophy belonged to the club. John Greig lifted the cup. It should have been the perfect ending. But football rarely gives perfect endings. Celebrations after the final led to serious trouble. Rangers were punished. The club was banned from defending the trophy they had fought so hard to win. Years later, John Greig admitted that remained one of his greatest regrets. The greatest night could never truly be enjoyed without remembering everything that had come before. For John Greig, joy and sorrow had become impossible to separate. And soon, Rangers would ask their greatest captain to take on the hardest job of all. In 1978, everything changed again. John Greig's playing career came to an end. Rangers wanted their greatest captain to become their manager. To many supporters, it felt like the perfect decision. Who better than the man who understood Rangers better than anyone? At first, there were reasons to believe. Trophies arrived. Hope returned. The future looked promising. But football can be far more unforgiving from the touchline than it ever is on the pitch. Rangers were changing. Great players were leaving. New rivals were growing stronger. Every disappointing result felt heavier, because the man standing in the dugout was John Greig. Supporters who had once sung his name expected miracles. Pressure followed him every single week. It became relentless. Years later, Greig admitted he had become a prisoner in his own home. Those words said everything. The greatest captain in Rangers history could handle almost anything. But even he could not escape the weight of impossible expectations. In October 1983, John Greig resigned. His time as Rangers manager was over, but his connection with Rangers never would be. Walking away did not mean walking away from Rangers. It never could. John Greig had given the club almost his entire life as a player, a captain, a manager, and later, a director. But football was changing. The Rangers he had known was changing too. In 2011, as the club entered one of the most turbulent periods in its history, John Greig resigned from the Rangers board. It was a painful moment, not because he stopped loving Rangers, but because he believed he could no longer play the role he had promised to fulfill. For many supporters, it was difficult to watch. The man who had stood beside Rangers, through triumph, through tragedy, through decades of service, was now watching another crisis unfold. Yet John Greig never turned his back on the club. He continued to return to Ibrox, to honour the memories, to represent Rangers, to remind new generations what loyalty truly looked like. Some legends are remembered for what they achieved. John Greig is remembered for what he gave. And after everything he had carried, one final chapter still remained. Today, John Greig is in his 80s. The stadiums are quieter. The teammates he once battled beside have become part of football history. Generations have come and gone. But one thing has never changed. At Rangers, John Greig is still treated as the standard, not because he was perfect, but because he never stopped serving the club. After everything he experienced, the triumphs, the heartbreak, the impossible expectations, he never walked away from Rangers. He returned, again and again, to honour those who never came home, to represent the club, and to remind younger generations what Rangers means. When John Greig received news that he had been awarded a CBE, he admitted it came as a complete surprise. His wife opened the letter, and for a moment, neither of them quite believed it. Even after a lifetime in football, recognition was never something he expected. Perhaps that says everything about the man he always was. Quiet, humble, committed. Rangers supporters once voted him their greatest ever Ranger. Not because he scored the most goals, not because he won the most trophies, but because when Rangers needed someone to carry responsibility, John Greig never looked the other way. Years pass. Football changes. Heroes grow old. But some names never lose their place. John Greig is one of them. Not simply because he captained Rangers, but because he gave the club almost everything he had. Subscribe, because one day, the voices that watched legends like John Greig will fall silent, and the only thing keeping their legacy alive will be those willing to remember it.